I want to thank you for joining me for this Wednesday evening service of First Baptist Church in Lucedale, Mississippi. Tonight I want to share a devotion with you from the Old Testament book of Jeremiah. I love the book of Jeremiah. I identify with Jeremiah in so many ways. He was a servant of the Lord, called when he was just a young man. I was also called when I was just a young man. And of course, Jeremiah's ministry spans many, many years. He was old by the time he finished his ministry. And look at me. But there's another thing about Jeremiah, and that is Jeremiah was prone, at least a little bit, to discouragement. And so am I. I find myself wired the same way. But one of the good things about God is that God engaged Jeremiah in those moments of discouragement. And down through the years, I have found that he has also engaged me in my own moments of discouragement. And so tonight, I'm praying that God will engage you, that he will meet you at some moment of defeat or some moment of despair, some moment of helplessness that you might find yourself in your life. And so tonight, the title of the message is, If You Have Run with Footmen. You don't understand that, but in this verse, God is addressing weariness in the life of Jeremiah. And it comes from a single verse, Jeremiah chapter 12, verse 5. The context of that verse is Jeremiah's expressing his frustration. He's a little bit discouraged. And then in the midst of his frustration and in the midst of his questions, this is what God says in verse 5. So we'll see that in just a minute. But before we look at the verse itself, let's remember that life is full of hardship. You already know that. That's just a fact. And so when we face difficulty, it can lead to discouragement. Discouragement can lead to seasons of defeat in our life, and those seasons of defeat can lead to periods of despair. When despair sets in, then comes, it seems, total spiritual and emotional exhaustion. And the thought of another assignment, another challenge, another responsibility is just absolutely overwhelming. Well, as I told you, Jeremiah answered God's call as a young man, and God warned him when he started that his assignment was not going to be easy. This is what he said in Jeremiah chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. Now behold, I have made you today as a fortified city, and as a pillar of iron, and as walls of bronze against the whole land, to the kings of Judah, to its princes, to its priests, and to the people of the land. They will fight against you, but they will not overcome you, for I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. Of course, that's a promise God made to Jeremiah early in his life. But Jeremiah's ministry, suffice it to say, was an uphill battle. It wasn't easy. They did fight against him, and the battles left him feeling overwhelmed and defeated. More than once, Jeremiah was ready to throw in his towel as a prophet and quit. But you know, I find that God is a bit of a coach. He doesn't let you feel sorry for yourself. He comes alongside you and challenges you to get back up and try again. But he never says, it'll get easier next time. I'm sure I've told you about my experience with a severe knee injury my senior year of high school. It was my first one. I tore my ACL. Nobody knew it at the time. It didn't show up on the x-ray. So the doctor said simply, rest it, ice it, and wrap it. Wait a few days and get back in the game. So that's what I did. I was actually out of practice about a week, but I knew I knew my knee was shot. It would come out of place and it would swell and hurt. And I would complain to my coach about my knee. And he said to me on one particular day, I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Son, you have to play with pain. Life is full of pain." Now, he obviously didn't know how bad my knee was, but he didn't say give up or quit. Instead, what he told me was that I could experience more pain, more difficulty, and more hardship. And what I needed to do was to learn to play with pain, to work through it, not to let it keep me out of the game or out of life. And it turned out to be one of the most important lessons in my life. That conversation with my coach has helped me push through a lot of painful moments in my life. And he was right. Life is full of pain. God had a similar conversation with Jeremiah. That's the one I began talking to you about in the beginning in chapter 12. Jeremiah was attacked. He was overwhelmed. He was overcome with a sense of defeat and despair. He complained to God, just like I complained to my coach. He said, and I paraphrase, "God, this hurts. I've tried my best to be your man and to fulfill your responsibility and my assignment. Why do these evil people seem to do well? Why do they always seem to have the upper hand and a better blessing? I'm tired in service. I'm tired of service. I don't think I can go on." Well, the first thing I want you to notice is that God heard Jeremiah's complaints. He knew Jeremiah's weariness. That's the good news in this passage. Unlike my coach and his not being acquainted with the true condition of my knee, God knew everything about Jeremiah. He knew what he faced, he knew what he felt, and he knew how he hurt. God also knows all of that about you and about me. He knows our efforts at service. He knows our struggles. He knows our weaknesses. He knows our failures. Yet instead of sharing a nice promise that would nurse Jeremiah in his weariness, he grabbed him by his face mask, so to speak, or by his clerical collar, or by his prophet robe, and said this, and here's our verse, Jeremiah chapter 12, verse 5. "If you have run with footmen, and they have worn you out, how can you compete with horses? If you stumble in the safe country, how will you manage by the thickets of the Jordan?" Well, let me share with you what I see in this verse. First, God was warning Jeremiah that there was more pain in his future. If you haven't figured that out already, it's not going to get any easier. Perhaps you're thinking, well, I wanted to listen tonight to be encouraged, not to be reminded that things were going to get worse. Where's the encouragement in that? Well, let me share with you the points of encouragement, and there's several. And here's the first one. Be encouraged that God knows your past. God knew Jeremiah's past service. He acknowledged what he had done. He had run with footmen. It was difficulty, and Jeremiah had been faithful in the past difficulty. God also knows your journey. He knows the past steps that you've made. He knows how hard it has been and how bad it has hurt. He knows your faults. He knows your failures, and he knows you. Nothing has happened in your life that has heretofore escaped God's notice. He knew that Jeremiah had run with footmen. He also knew that in this moment in Jeremiah's life, that Jeremiah was incredibly weary. So first, it should encourage you to know that God knows the same thing about you. He knows your journey. He knows the roads and the struggles of the past. He knows the battles and the bruises, and if there was betrayal along the way, as there was in Jeremiah's life, God knows all about that too. God knows about your past. Second, be encouraged that God knows about your future. The future will be hard. In some cases, if not in most, it will be harder than the past. God knows that. He knows all the details of your future journey. You don't know that, and you don't need to know. Like me, I'm sure you're grateful that you didn't know about all the difficulties that you faced up till now before you faced them. I don't know that I would have been able to handle that. No heart can stand to know difficulty in advance. Looking back, you can see that. And so for that reason, be content to leave those future struggles in God's hands. You don't know what they are or where they will be, but God knows. For Jeremiah, those future struggles involved increasing difficulty. He would no longer run with footmen. He would run with horsemen. And his place of service would not be in the relative safety of an easy land, but in the tangled, briar-ridden thickets of the Jordan. Jeremiah had experienced pain, but there was more pain to come. Life is full of pain. How would he fare in those painful places? That's the question, is it not? How am I going to face my future difficulties? And how are you going to face yours? That was the question that God was asking Jeremiah. What was the answer that God was looking for from Jeremiah? To discover that, we need to go back to the original promise God made him. When God made that promise at the very beginning of Jeremiah's journey, God was fully aware of what would be required for Jeremiah on his journey of faith. He knew what Jeremiah would need before he would ask. He knew what he needed in the past, and he knew what he needed in the future. So knowing his past and knowing his future, how did God expect Jeremiah to run with horsemen and to live and serve in times of increasing difficulty? And how does God expect you to live facing a future with more pain than in the past? Remember, the coach said, life is full of pain. You've got to learn how to live and to play with pain. Third, be encouraged that God's promise in the past is still in place in the face of future difficulty. The Lord has said, remember, they will fight against you, but they will not overcome you, for I am with you to deliver you. The God who knows all about your past and all about your future, who did not abandon you in seasons of past difficulty, will not abandon you in any season of future difficulty. But we're yet to hear Jeremiah's answer to this question of how. If you have run with horsemen, if you have run with footmen, how will you run with horsemen? If you've become discouraged and worn out in a land of relative safety, how will you fare in the briar-ridden thickets of the Jordan? How will he make it? How will you make it tomorrow if tomorrow is harder than today? If the coming year is harder than the past? If the spiritual struggles of the future are more intense and the battles with the enemy require more, how will you do it? Well, finally, be encouraged to know that only by total dependence upon God will you be able to survive your journey. Well, initially, I know that even that might sound a bit discouraging, but if you think about it, the only way you've survived the journey to where you are is by that day-to-day, moment-by-moment dependence upon God. That has carried you through all the struggles of your past. The strength of God that he promised would be sufficient in the weakness of your past, and was sufficient, will be sufficient in the weakness of your future, whatever that might be. G. Campbell Morgan, concerning this passage of Scripture, said, "In every hour of battle, when a man is bruised and hardened by his bruising, he's being prepared for another battle that lies ahead until the last field is fought and won and the kingdom of God has come. By all the training of present difficulty, God is preparing us, if we are in His will and are prepared to follow Him, for the yet more difficult service that lies ahead." You see, there are truths that you and I will never discover about God and about ourselves until we come to a moment such as this in the life of Jeremiah, when we come face to face with our own weakness, overcome by our own weariness, facing the failure of the past and fearing failure in the future. In such a place of desperation, God meets us just like He met Jeremiah. God knew Jeremiah's past, and He knew Jeremiah's future. He knew Jeremiah's weakness, and He knew that Jeremiah's only hope was to come to a complete surrender and a complete dependence upon God for the journey ahead. After a time of faithful service, you might experience a season of brokenness, leaving you feeling defeated and discouraged and afraid to go on. Listen, God knows where you are and where you've been and where you're going and what you need for your journey. God won't allow you to have a pity party about how hard it has been or how hard it might be. He will be your coach and tell you to get back up and get back in the game, reminding you that as He has been with you in the past, He will be with you in the future, regardless of how hard it gets or how painful it might be. The God who's been faithful will continue to be faithful to you and be true to His promise. Thank you so much for listening.